Fresh Killer.
What up, tribe? How art thou? I wanted to speak with you all this evening about the war in the Ukraine and the United States involvement in it. As I've stated before, I don't understand. I think that there are much more pressing issues in this country that we should deal with, such as homelessness, the rise in gas prices, the rise in food prices, inflation in general, so many things that I would place before our economic support for this war in the Ukraine. But what I think never matters, because over $40 billion has been spent or will be spent in the near future in our aiding the Ukrainian war effort against the Russians. The Atlantic wrote an article. The Atlantic has an article right now. It's in the June edition of that magazine, which makes me even more passionate about my position, because they talk about Poland and how Poland took on a lot of Ukrainian refugees when the war first popped off. But now the people who opened up their homes are feeling worn out. They're like, wow, how long are we going to have to do this, right? So that's how the article starts. But then they talk about the racism and how the white ethnic Ukrainians are treated versus the Ukrainians who have ancestry in Iraq and the Yemen and also Nigeria, the black ones as well. I saw the videos when the war first happened about them not letting black students and black people on the buses to get out of the Ukraine, but now I see it in a magazine that I trust. In this article, they talk about a woman who let, I think, a family of three into her home. And she says, when the Exodus began, Clausewitz organization started receiving reports of such people being beaten or harassed as they attempted to flee the country and enter Poland, right? These are the non-white immigrants they're talking about. Numerous videos of these encounters have circulated on the internet. Some Polish university dorms and stadiums have rejected refugees without Ukrainian passports, as have volunteer buses transporting people to other European countries further west. Some Polish households have declined to take in non-white immigrants who fled Ukraine or asked guests to leave after discovering that they were not ethnically Ukrainian. And so I'm reading this, and I've seen these videos for a long time now, and I've heard about how black students and refugees are treated in Eastern European nations. I mean, I've been aware of that for a long time, but I think I'm just befuddled by why we are spending so much money there, and how can you justify that? The article speaks to something else. The article talks about a Nigerian-born man that had been in the Ukraine for 25 years. He got married to a Ukrainian woman, had 2 children with her. They got divorced. The war pops off, he's going to leave, and they would not let him leave that country. And then they would also not let him enter Poland. But he speaks about all of the racism that he faced while trying to flee that country. The article goes on to say his name is Nduka Edike. And it goes on to say, Nduka said Ukrainians would frequently spit on him on the bus or yell at him, saying things like, "Why did you come here?" In 2006, during a rash of violent attacks by skinhead youth groups, he said he was stabbed several times and spent a month in the hospital, part of it in a coma. A friend was killed in the same incident, but he stayed in the country for his children, who he said would have better opportunities there than in Nigeria, parts of which are burdened by terrorism and violent crime. When Russia invaded, Naduka headed for the Polish border on a bus, but he was stuck living in a humanitarian camp nearby for 6 days, and at least once was blocked from crossing the border, according to American and British volunteers who tried to help him. United Nations employees eventually obtained emergency travel documents showing that he had been living in Ukraine. But while he waited, Ukrainian migrants yelled racial slurs at him constantly. He and the volunteers said one man pointed his cell phone camera at Naduka and yelled, "Look, they taught the monkey to speak Ukrainian." My goodness. So he's trying to flee the country, as are several other people from Ukraine, right? They're trying to flee and go into Poland. But the people, they are all fleeing. They are yelling at him and calling him racial slurs and calling him a monkey. They're all fleeing the same forces. They're all fleeing Russia together. He's been in the country for 25 years. But in their lowest point, where they probably had to leave precious items in their home, they probably had to leave pictures, they probably had to leave things of sentimental value, they had to leave book, all these things that happen when someone is uprooted. And in the midst of all of that, they point to him and they call him racial slurs. And so I'm looking at these things happening, I'm reading this article, and I'm really perplexed as to how are people looking at this as a moral crisis, and it behooves us to help these people who, many of them, it has been documented, are brazenly racist. Not just them, but in Poland, where they are also supposed to be taking refugees. And I would like to see this issue addressed, because as of right now, I find it to be deeply disturbing, not to mention that there's civil unrest happening in several sub-Saharan African countries, but we do not help them. We do not reach to help them. We do not raise their flags in our yard like we do with these white people who are openly practicing racism. And yet these are the people that we choose to back up financially when we are struggling in this country. So once again, I'm just deeply disturbed and troubled by this mismanagement of funds, and by funding Ukraine over $40 billion. Not only because we need it, not only because there are conflicts happening around the world, but because of things like this, which make it personal for me when people are being discriminated against and spit upon and being called racist names by the people that we are supposed to be protecting. All right, so shout out to the journalist Caitlin Dickerson for writing this piece. And that's all I got. Stay informed, stay critically conscious, and peace, tribe, and another.